you very much to the organizers for all the effort involved in and transforming this into an online event and persevering and making it happen. As Julian said, my field of specialty is history of photography, and my research is now around photography in Latin America and gender in photography. So especially in Latin America, women photographers and women photographed. So I'm very terrible with time. So I know myself, if I talk, I will for sure extrapolate the 10-minute limit. So if you excuse me, I will read to be more compliant. So the 70s and 80s were unique decades for Brazilian photography. A series of internal and external circumstances contributed to its development as a language, as a professional, and a potential instrument for political action. From the second half of the 70s, the country experienced a slow and gradual, inverted commas, political reopening, led by the military that had seized power in 1964, reducing the severity of repression against the opponents of the regime and including the loosening of press censorship. Immediately, a significant number of small and medium-sized newspapers and magazines appeared. Acting in a more independent fashion, this alternative press, as it was known, was able to accommodate professionals who had fallen prey to political purges, as well as a new generation of politically engaged journalists and photographers. The alternative press also created a new market for photojournalism, which was able to transform the photographic practice and visuality in Brazil. With a more authorial production, the independent and politically engaged photographers sought to associate themselves in agencies, often cooperatives, where they managed their own work. They fought on two concomitant battlefronts. On the one hand, they acted defending creative freedom and the possibility to decide their own guidelines. On the other hand, they fought for recognition and professionalization of Brazilian photojournalism. The belief in photography's power to transform society produced a socially critical documentary photography that was opposed to the regime by questioning and denouncing its arbitrarities. So I've been interviewing a number of Brazilian photographers active during the time, during a number of years now. And I'll talk today about 6 of them. Those are Milton Guran, Cláudia Andujar, Nair Benedito, Rosa Gauditano, Luiz Abreu, and Antonio Sagesi. They are some of the greatest representatives of this generation that challenged the dictatorship. And in their practices and images, it's possible to identify a plurality of themes and approaches related to militancy for human rights. The photographic essays that they made during that period deal with narratives about hunger, violence against the dispossessed, and race and gender minorities, transformation and exploitation of urban and rural territory, but they are also about the resistance to these processes. So published in this alternative press and disseminated in the documentary photography circuits that began to take place in that period, these images denounced the injustices and indignities promoted by the military dictatorship. But what is more interesting in my view is that a Latin American agenda was added to this context. So Brazil was not alone in this process. In 1978, a Latin American photography colloquium was held in Mexico City for the first time, and it was organized by the Mexican Council of Photography. It happened again in 81, 84, 93, and 96. This colloquia brought together diverse and geographically distant productions from a significant number of Latin American countries, attracting the interest of European and North American intellectuals and artists as well. Until then, many Brazilian photographers resented not being acquainted to their Latin American colleagues' works. They also pointed, in the interviews that I conducted, the Brazilian photographers also pointed to the lack of training available or other pathways for learning the photographic trade. The colloquia sought not only to recognize the region's contemporary photographic production, but also to establish a historical reference, publishing books and organizing a bibliography about Latin American photography, of course. They organized photographic exhibitions, courses, workshops, and reflected about the preservation of collections, among many other issues. The goal was to produce and disseminate knowledge about Latin American photography from the Latin American perspective, removing it from a place understood as subaltern in the history of world photography. In the first two colloquia, the photographs and discussions were predominantly related to documentary photography and photojournalism. Thus, was a strong presence of social issues. In their interviews, Milton Guran, Cláudia Andujar, Nair Benedito, Rosa Gauditano, Luiz Abreu, and Antonio Sagesi talked about the particularities of the essays they select and sent to the colloquia. They all participated in this colloquia. These are images of great contestatory value and political engagement. So now I will try to share my screen and I'll show you some images. Okay. So here's Cláudia Andujar sent to the first colloquium a series about the Yanomami people. So she participated in the first colloquium with a series of photographs about the Yanomami ethnic group, whom she had worked with for decades, both photographing and fighting for the recognition of their lands. The indigenous issue was strongly censored during the dictatorship, which official positions supported the occupation of indigenous lands and exploitation of its natural resources, and in doing so unofficially accepting the genocide of these people and any resemblances to the current government, not just a coincidence. And I'm happy to say that we London is hosting an upcoming Cláudia Andujar exhibition in the Barbican. So about the Yanomami struggle, I recommend. I saw this exhibition in São Paulo and it's really great. Also part of the first colloquium was an essay by Rosa Gauditano on prostitutes in downtown São Paulo. Portraying quite directly this kind of modern metropolis underworld, the photographs were the first to approach gender issues, a theme that she would continue to address throughout her career. At the time, she was also photographing political demonstrations against the dictatorship, workers' movements, and trade union strikes, as well as the Black movement in São Paulo. Milton Guran participated in the second colloquium with the photographic essay on an indigenous marriage ceremony held in the Upper Xingu River in the Amazon. As with Andujar, the indigenous theme was also considered a form of political resistance to military policies. He built his career on his work with indigenous people and other ethnic minorities, especially Brazilian slave descendants. Nair Benedito sent to the second colloquium a series, both risky and contestatory, that portrayed the abuse suffered by young offenders under the custody of the FEBENs, which is the São Paulo State Foundation for the Well-Being of the Child. There, children and young people endured mistreatment and torture perpetrated by the same people who should protect them. Benedito's work in the 70s and 80s was marked by a politically engaged, contentious vision of the dictatorship, covering such themes as the labor and indigenous movements. Luis Abreu, for his part, participated in the event with portraits of psychiatric patients, equally a marginalized social category that can represent the excluded and the voiceless. Another relevant topic for the period was Abreu's photographic coverage of the landless workers' movement when they were beginning to mobilize in the south of the country. Finally, Antônio Sagesi sent the second colloquium pictures of workers and dispossessed people from the center of São Paulo. Anonymous, the images of their faces and bodies are frequently contrasted with other vernacular images presented on the walls of their workplaces and dwellings. Some of the photographic essays are well known. Some of these photographic essays that I showed are well known, other not so much. All of them, however, have significant influence on the social imaginary in Latin American visual culture, having over time become representatives of the activist agenda for minorities and human rights, which marked the final period of the military dictatorship in Brazil. They represent the radical plurality of themes and social commitment that orbit around democracy and resistance in a society in search for its rights. That's what I have to say. Thank you. Stop share. Thank you.